Bienvenido, Bill Reiter. Thank you so much for joining us here on HQ, sir. We're going to go through Western Conference teams, and we're going to go through some of the top ones, and you're going to give us one trade each team needs to make, and we're looking at some realistic situations, some bold situations, some realistic ones. Let's start with the Lakers. What would you like to see happen here?
So there's only one move that the Lakers need to make. It's a difficult one. It's an unlikely one. I don't think it's an impossible one. It's something, Amanda, we've talked about here on HQ for the last several weeks. They've got to find a way to unencumber themselves from Russell Westbrook in the final year of that contract that he just opted into. You'd have to send Horton Tucker. You'd have to send that 2006 probably first-round pick and draft swaps, maybe even a second first-round pick to unload that contract. The Pacers were an organization, as I understand it several weeks ago, that were mildly interested in that conversation as they thought about a rebuild. They shut the door on that opportunity. But if the Lakers decide this is the year they want to compete and that the LeBron James window that is closing has to be taken advantage of, you offer all those picks. You understand you give away a big part of the future. You move on from Westbrook, and it gives you the flexibility to bring in some actual guys who can fit with LeBron James and Anthony Davis.
All right, let's head over to the Lakers. You have two options here. One is bold, one is realistic. Let's start with the realistic one.
All right, so the Clippers are, I think, an actual contender if, and I know it's an if, Kawhi Leonard can be healthy and Paul George can stay healthy. If you have those two guys, and we've seen this over the past, it's so easy to forget how great Kawhi Leonard is. You're probably constructed in the right way. So the realistic option is to go, because they're in a very difficult cap situation. They don't have a lot of flexibility. What they really need is a backup point guard, and they don't have to operate in a really bold way to be a competitor because of the superstars they have. So you find a team that's likely in rebuild mode. You find someone, an organization that's willing to move on for some assets, some draft picks down the road. Think TJ McConnell as a backup point guard with the Pacers, under contract for the next 2 years, makes about $9 million a year. Nice player, good fit. That is the one that I think is the realistic scenario. But if you want to go big game hunting and you want to get really, really aggressive and you want to get a little crazy, and these things sometimes happen in the NBA. Yes, Kyrie Irving opted into that massive final year of his deal in Brooklyn, but he is not a happy camper there. We know that. We know the Brooklyn Nets aren't exactly in love with him and what's gone on the last year and a half. So if you can move on from 2 or 3 of the following: Norman Powell, Reggie Jackson, Marcus Morris, or Luke Kennard, it's $30 to $45 million you need to unload. And again, it's not a guarantee the Nets want all those guys, so you'd have to get creative with other teams being involved in a deal. You could technically create the space to go get Kyrie Irving. You certainly have to attach some future picks. But if you're the Clippers and you think, unlike some people in the NBA, that Kyrie, the juice is worth the squeeze there, it's a move you could technically make.
Okay, I want to talk about the Warriors here, and I want to start bold because it does have to do with Kyrie. But when it comes to the Warriors, and we're going to get to your realistic one, but let's go bold here. It has to do with getting Kevin Durant back.
All right, so I'll say this. It's going to sound like I'm a crazy person, and there might be an argument from time to time that's the case. This actually was an NBA scout who pitched this to me, who does not work for the Warriors, who has never worked for the Warriors, but scouts are people too. He's a Warriors fan. So this is me channeling an NBA scout's vision when it looked like Kyrie Irving was going to leave. This is all contingent on Kyrie Irving finds a sign and trade now that he's opted into the deal, and Kevin Durant forces his way out. But there aren't many teams that actually have the assets in the room to go get him. If the Warriors were able and willing to send on Andrew Wiggins and Jordan Poole and James Wiseman, and or Jonathan Kuminga, and I love Kuminga, but still a promising young player and some picks, because we've got many years left under Kevin Durant's contract. Obviously, he's a massive talent. In theory, if the Warriors would welcome him back, and if Kevin Durant could, I suppose, swallow his pride in return, it would be one of the few organizations that make sense, that have the players they can send out contract-wise to make the numbers work, and that have some of the assets, Kuminga and Wiseman being the main ones, that might tempt the Nets if Durant was forcing his way somewhere else.
Okay. And then realistically?
So the realistic one is actually the least interesting, least bold, most boring answer on the face of the earth, but it's really no trade at all. They're in a situation now where the players that they can retain, right, the guys they can bring back who are able to leave, think Gary Payton II or Kevon Looney, those guys would be happy to stay in Golden State and can do so if the Warriors want to pay them a bunch of money. but they're in a severe luxury tax situation. And Bob Myers, who's the head of basketball operations for the Warriors, talked about this yesterday, saying, look, we're going to be able to bring some of these guys back, but we don't have unlimited resources. So the actual trade is no trade. It's trying to convince, or maybe trade on all those rings to convince the ownership there in the Bay to just spend even more money to keep intact all those guys. Because as you bring back guys like Gary Payton II or Looney, you're going to pay a multitude per dollar in tax because of how much money the Warriors are spending.
Okay, Bill, so realistically not making a move for the Warriors makes sense, right? Like, I mean, they won it. Your realistic move for the Suns is also not to make a move. I have here in my notes, you say the Suns are complete, but they haven't gotten it done. In the past 2 seasons, you would have thought they would have, and they haven't. So, I mean, is it best not to make a move for them?
So for me, I would have given DeAndre Ayton the money, and I would still give DeAndre Ayton the money. I know this past year was disappointing, and there's a sense in that organization that Ayton shut it down, didn't play, whatever the reason. But a year ago is not that long ago. They were a couple wins away from an NBA championship. But we know, and I know talking to sources, it is an open secret, if a secret at all, that the Phoenix Suns just don't value DeAndre Ayton at all. There are teams that do. And so what I would suggest for the Suns, if they're not going to take my advice, and Amanda, they're probably not going to, is get real value from DeAndre Ayton. Go out and get Miles Bridges from Charlotte. Now, this is predicated on the idea that the Hornets aren't going to be willing to spend the money you need for Bridges, but Michael Jordan has shown himself, the owner of that team, to at times be, let's be polite about it, very frugal. So you'd have to send DeAndre Ayton to an organization that, let's say Atlanta, a team that wants him, and then the assets that they would give up for DeAndre Ayton would have to go to Charlotte, and then Miles Bridges could come back to Phoenix. But Bridges is a guy that can shoot the three-point shot. I think there's a higher ceiling in what he's done there. He's got the physique, not the consistency, but I think, can be a great defensive player. And so if you're not willing to retain DeAndre Ayton, find a way to use Ayton and that asset to go out and get somebody you want long-term.
Bill, talking to you yesterday, you were talking about the Grizzlies, and you said, look, I think the Grizzlies actually have a better chance of being better than the Mavericks. So talk to me about the Grizzlies, a bold move and then a realistic one that they need to make here.
All right, I'll give you the realistic one first, because I can say that with more of a straight face. I really like the idea of going out and getting Rudy Gobert. And this is under the idea, and I think this is what's going to come to fruition, that Danny Ainge, who runs basketball operations in Utah, is going to, if not break this thing up, at least do a semi-breakup where they build around Donovan Mitchell and they move on from some of the other guys. Rudy Gobert is a great defensive player, but let's be frank, Amanda, he does not get along with Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell doesn't get along with him. They're talking about this reality in the postseason a few months ago. It does not work. Now, Steven Adams and Dillon Brooks would have to exit because of those expiring contracts. It might be attractive to a team like Utah. Memphis would have to attach assets, almost certainly picks, but those are expiring contracts, and it would put Utah in a rebuild situation that maybe wouldn't take too long. That's the realistic one. Here's the bold one. And again, it's unlikely, but I don't think impossible. Let's just say that Kyrie Irving finds a way to get himself through what is now a sign and trade somewhere else, and Kevin Durant wakes up in Brooklyn and says, get me the hell out of here. I don't want to be a part of this. We talked about the Warriors as a possible destination. Another team that has the assets in the space is the Oklahoma City Thunder. I don't think Kevin Durant wants to go to the Thunder, but the Memphis Grizzlies are really intriguing. Again, Dillon Brooks and Steven Adams get you close to the number you need to, but there's a lot of young players in that team you could ship out. There are draft picks that you could ship out. And I think the most important thing in this age of player power is convincing a star like Kevin Durant he should play for your organization. Durant has thrived and been happy in a smaller market in the past, like Oklahoma City. He has shown that not only does he like to play with dynamic point guards, he wants to. That is exactly what John Morant is. And that is a Memphis team that not only is on the verge of the next level, but their absolute rival, the team that they can't stand, the team that they hate and want to beat, is the Golden State Warriors. What a great way for Kevin Durant to show that he is the main guy. What did Charles Barkley say? He is the bus driver. Then to allow himself to be traded to Memphis, team up with John Morant and that young core, and lead them over the Golden State Warriors.
This is one of the ones where I didn't look ahead and see your answer, and I love it. Like, it kind of makes my stomach hurt for some reason, but I also am really intrigued by this. So I hope we put this on social media soon and see what everybody else thinks about it. All right, let's go to the Mavs. Look, I talked to you yesterday. You gave the Mavericks about a 7% chance of getting Zach LaVine. So you have him in there as a potential trade or somebody that they could land. So what is the package you're putting together to get him?
Yeah, fortune favors the bold, and success is about overcoming the odds. I think it is 7%, but let's find a way to do it, Dallas. Spencer Dinwiddie has to exit, and Tim Hardaway Jr. has to exit just to make just to make the numbers work. And then you're going to have to attach, and by the way, those are not going to be valuable pieces to a Chicago Bulls team. Maybe Dinwiddie would be, to a Chicago Bulls team that thinks they're a contender. So you have to involve, I would imagine, a third team to bring back some assets that you send to Chicago. And you have to attach some picks if you're the Mavericks. But I think that Christian Wood, Zach LaVine, Luka Doncic triumvirate is a team. Maybe they need to work on their defense a little bit, but offensively and what they can do in a 7-game series, and guys can create their own shot in their own basket, is really, really dangerous. I don't think it's a likely outcome, but Zach LaVine, by all accounts, isn't committed to the Chicago Bulls. We'll see if he decides to do it here in 24 hours when it's time for him to put his pen to his name on, sign that contract. But if he doesn't want to be in Chicago, if he's willing to take one less year and give up $50 million or more dollars, I think the Dallas Mavericks, if he could force his way to that organization, are a really interesting fit.
We will buckle up for the roller coaster that is about to be free agency starting tomorrow. Bill Reiter, thank you so much. Taking a look at odds to win the West, no surprise here at the very top, you find the reigning champs, the Warriors, followed by the Clippers, the Suns, the Mavericks, and then the Grizzlies. Coming up next here on CBS Sports HQ.